coming along to our series of fourth Thursday education events. Got two people on today, Dr. Kathy Peterson, who's going to talk about prevention of adult not growth, but we're going to start off today with Gareth Forbes from the Clinical Digital Resource Collaborative, who've created some useful resources to support the current GLP1 challenges and also some of the wider cardiovascular resources to support individual practices and the wider system. So with no more ado, Gareth, if you want to just start in your own time.
Okay, I'm Gareth Forbes. I'm a GP at Ledgate Surgery in County Durham. I'm not a particular expert in diabetes or cardiovascular disease, but try and help build resources to support our work. So I'll just share my screen if I can. So have you got that presentation? Michael, can you let me know if that's come up?
Yeah, that's no problem at all, Gareth. All firing.
Okay, so these are some resources principally to talk about the problems with GLP1 shortages. So as you're probably all aware, there's going to be a shortage of GLP1 analogues probably going on for at least a year, maybe longer, we're not entirely sure. So there's a regional protocol for trying to deal with that. So to support that, we've built some searches to support people with reviewing these patients. Now there's a new function within SystmOne called visualizations, which are actually a much more powerful way of looking at reports and individual patient information. If you haven't enabled this at your practice yet, it's really worth getting it enabled. You just need to email TPP to ask them to turn it on for you. And what that can do is to turn the searches into something that's more user-friendly. So this is our GLP1 dashboard, which shows you all the information you need in sort of one place with some structure around it as well. So you can see at my practice, I've got 23 patients on GLP1 analogues, and that's 5.6% of my patients with diabetes. And you can click on the little jigsaw link and that'll show you the list of patients. And then to start with, we built some safety searches. So these are patients on GLP1 analogues who might have a safety reason for either stopping or changing the dose of the GLP1 analogues. So for each of these safety issues, there's a little drop down that gives you more information. So you can see, it looks a bit like this for the renal impairment issue. It gives you a bit more background as to what the guidance is. So these are patients with DKA or pancreatitis, patients who don't seem to have type 2 diabetes, people who are on insulin and retinopathy, where there's some concerns about worsening retinopathy if you correct HbA1c too quickly, and then people with significant gastrointestinal disease. And for some of the GLP1 analogues like liraglutide, they're actually contraindicated in some patients with things like inflammatory bowel disease. And then the second half of the visualization is more about thinking about prioritizing patients for review, because most practices are going to have quite a lot of patients on these drugs. So what we've done here is to create a series of searches which might identify the people that you want to think about first. So the top one is about people who don't seem to be collecting any prescriptions for their GLP1 analogues. So you may just need to work out what's going on there, take it off repeat. Then you've got people who've still got a really high HbA1c. Is it working for them? Should they continue on it? People who haven't had a recent check, it's very difficult to decide what to do for those patients. So you might need to think about getting them in for a check. People who've started at GLP1s and been on them for a while, but haven't had a check to make, to see what's happened to their HbA1c. So they're definitely going to need an HbA1c. And then thinking about the NICE guidelines for carrying on GLP1 analogues. This is a search that looks at people who don't seem to have dropped by 11 since they started it. Then you've got people who, you've got people who are on insulin as well as GLP-1s, who might need more intensive monitoring, might need to be under a specialist. People who are on GLP-1s, which is not part of triple therapy, which is what the guidelines recommend. Then the last two, so the people who are on GLP-1s but don't have a high BMI, very high BMI, or don't have a non-diabetic obesity-related condition, because again, the NICE guideline says we should only be using these drugs in people whose BMIs are more than 35, or they've got another obesity-related condition like hypertension or sleep apnea or something like that. And then finally, any patients who don't have diabetes who are being prescribed GLP-1 analogs, because we shouldn't be doing that in primary care. That would be something coming from a tier 3 service. So to go along with that management visualization, which is really showing you your overall practice position, there's then a visualization for an individual patient. So this essentially tells you everything you need to know for this patient. So we can see this patient's currently taking Bydureon. Their HbA1c is 57. You can see what their weight is and their BMI. We've got a little warning that their EGFR actually might be a bit low for this patient. So you can see down here, the EGFR is 40. Shouldn't really be using Bydureon with an EGFR less than 50. And there's lots of function here to see the information in more detail, to decide what are we going to do with this person when their GLP-1 analog supply runs out. So if you click on this button, you can get an overview of what's happened with the key information over time. So we can see that their weight has dropped over time, but it was dropping. Sorry, HbA1c has dropped over time, but it was dropping before the GLP-1 was started, where these little black bars are. Same with the weight. Then we can, if we just go to the next one, if we click on this little grey button here, you'll be able to see what's happened to the HbA1c alongside the GLP-1 analog. So we can see does seem to be a significant reduction in HbA1c with the treatment. Or we could look at weight. So we can see again, weight was 129 kilos here, and now down to 118. So there has been quite a big impact on the weight as well. So this person would certainly sort of qualify for continuing their GLP-1 analog. So what are we going to do next? Well, if we click on this button, it'll give us a summary of their medication. So we can see currently they're on metformin, DAPA, Bydureon and gliclazide. We can follow what's happened to their HbA1c with the medicines. I've just cut this short just to show the most recent information. So in terms of thinking about options for this patient, they probably shouldn't be on Bydureon anyway because their renal function's a bit low. So if they're going to stay on exenatide, we'd need to change it to Byetta, although that's a twice daily injection, so many people don't like it. If the GLP-1s run out altogether, then her options are probably to stop taking a GLP-1 analog and try really hard to keep the weight off and see what happens to her HbA1c. Or you could think about adding maybe something like a gliptin, which we can see from here she's never had before. The next section here is a checklist. So if you expand the checklist, there's a checklist to make sure that you've given the patient all the right information for GLP-1 analogs, talking about particular side effects, so that if there are any problems in the future, you can be clear that you've given that information. And then the final part, just get the information. So this section here tells us about the GLP-1 analogs. So the green bit means that's what they're currently on. If they were yellow, it would mean they tried these other drugs before. So if it was semaglutide was yellow, then we'd know she'd had semaglutide before. And then finally, at the very bottom is you can expand the local medicines management protocol. So that tells us what we're supposed to do with people when the HbA1c GLP-1s run out. And you can see it's customized to the patient. So this patient's got an HbA1c of less than 58. So the management strategy is to consider optimizing the oral medication. Like I say, adding a gliptin would be one option, or just seeing if she could manage without GLP-1 altogether. This is a different patient. So we've got a patient whose HbA1c is much higher. We can see she's on Trulicity. And if we follow what's happened to her over time, so we can see she's been on the GLP-1 analog for quite a while. And actually, HbA1c is starting to rise now. It doesn't seem to be working very well. Some effect on weight, but not enormous. So for this sort of person, if we have a look at what medication they are on, hang on. So we can see that the medicine shortage protocol again, this time giving us the HbA1c 58 to 86 recommendation. So that's consider optimizing the oral medication and then either think about adding other oral meds, or if that doesn't work, think about insulin. So you can see this lady has already been on SGLT2 inhibitors, and she's been on alogliptin, and she's had an adverse reaction to canagliflozin. So it may be that optimizing her, and she's already on metformin and maximum dose of glycoside, so it may be that this is somebody who might need to go on to insulin, as there might not be many other options for her. So I'm happy to take any questions on that before I just briefly show you the other resources that are available for wider lipid management and cardiovascular prevention.
I'm not sure how I put my hand up. Can I put my hand up?
Yeah, well, there's not many of us here, so I think you'll be fine.
So I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. Diabetes care and all the bewildering number of drugs within the NICE guidance fills me with dread when I get patients these days. Once I've done my metformin and my glycoside, or I can manage my dapagliflozins and things now, I think, and I get going. You talk very fluently about all the different types of drugs and why you might use one and why you might use another. So how much experience are you working as a specialist GP in diabetes, or are you just the GP in the practice that does the majority of the diabetes?
Yeah, I'm definitely not a specialist, but I do most of the diabetes in the practice. Yeah,
and within Northumberland, we've got some meds management meetings coming up, and I've identified that I'm struggling to keep up to date on what a GP would do. And I think we're at this level where we've got big practices where you might have somebody who can deal with it all. You've got small practices where knowing all of it might be difficult for a very small team. So there's an element of needing to get the education pitched at the right level to say, this is what we probably expect to happen to a patient in primary care. But we also get a sense that our local diabetes services are a bit overwhelmed with the volume of stuff that's coming at them that is no longer manageable in primary care. And I'm just interested to get a sense check where you feel things are on your patch and what you think is reasonable decision making in primary care.
So in our patch, about 6 or 7 years ago, there was a contract called the Integrated Diabetes Model, which provided practices with a bit of extra funding for doing some enhanced diabetes care. So there were 3 different levels, but effectively at the higher level, you needed to be able to initiate GLP-1 analogs and insulin. So our local, our prevalence of diabetes in County Durham is enormous, and the secondary care teams were being completely overwhelmed. So it was very much about trying to move that work out into primary care with some funding and some training, which came with it. And that was a difficult process. It's difficult now that all this, we're having increasing amounts of diabetes, and the complexity of it is getting more tricky. And then along comes the GLP-1 shortage, which people are really not very happy about having to take on all that extra work as well.
Yeah.
Yes, we are where we are.
Jonathan nodding. Am I about right, Jonathan? I'm interested to see what other people think before we go on.
Yeah, I am clueless when it comes to this, because we have 2 GPs in the practice who essentially do diabetes clinic, so they specialize in that. So when, as you say, when it gets above initiating the first kind of a prescription or two, it goes off to someone else, and then I don't have to deal with it anymore. So yeah, that's my impression. I think aligns with yours in terms of Northumberland and what people are doing. I guess I had to also.
Jonathan's gone.
Or he's taking up a cricket umpire course.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? We
Sorry,
lost you
Jonathan,
then, Jonathan.
You just cut off there.
I could still hear you, but I obviously wasn't moving. No, it was just about how easy that visualization stuff is on SystmOne, because we've got one of our partners in the practice is big into this kind of stuff, and he's every week he's coming back with something new for SystmOne to make our lives easier, which it generally does. And this seems like it's a completely different playing field in terms of, I just don't know how easy or difficult it is to learn to get these things set up, because clearly for the person interacting with that, that's so much easier than having to do the individual searches and all the rest of it once that visualization, the dashboard type of stuff is there.
So it's literally just one email to TPP just to say, please turn it on for us.
But did you have to make all of those templates, or those templates were already there?
No, I've made them, but they're shared right across the region, so you'll have access to them.
Fine. Okay.
Perfect. Looks like a really useful tool. Karen, Susanna, you're sitting there listening. Maybe you can comment about what your thoughts are, or.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't get my microphone off. That looks absolutely brilliant. I actually work at HMP Northumberland, and it would be great to have all of these tools because they're back in the 1980s in terms of their SystmOne usage. I don't know if I'm going to have to find out if it will be shared with us, because although we're based in Northumberland, the overarching company that looks after us is in Yorkshire, which obviously is slightly different. So I'm going to, I'll get onto TPP tomorrow and find out. But it looks amazingly useful. Just, you know, it saves all of us doing our own individual searches and gives us a little bit of guidance as to what we should be doing. Particularly, as I agree with Jonathan and the others, I have no clue about diabetes because I feel like I've become de-skilled over the years by relying on one partner. Myself.
I'm working on a visualization for diabetes in general, which will help with that decision making. So it'll, you know, as give you a patient and then give you essentially what NICE thinks the next steps would be with customized for that person. So, you know, it would be, you know, it wouldn't tell you to use metformin if their renal function was really low. That sort of the level of thinking. That
would be amazing, because it's, I mean, it does feel like a minefield, and I'm sure everyone feels the same. We've got 1,000,001 guidances from 1,000,001 different specialties, and we're expected to understand all of them. And I just can't retain that kind of stuff. And you get anxiety about potentially mismanaging patients as a result. So a tool like that would be amazing.
I'll just very quickly maybe show you the lipid dashboard, which will kind of just illustrate the what you can do with this. So can you see my SystmOne there?
Yes.
I'll just make it bigger on the screen. On a bit of a go slow. So these dashboards are kind of done for lots of cardiovascular disease prevention. So this is your lipid stuff. So at the top, it's got a kind of ballpark figure type thing of how you're doing. So, for example, you can see secondary prevention. I've got 92.6 of my patients on lipid lowering, and it tells me how many are high and so on. And then further down on the visualization is the kind of work to do. So if you wanted to look at primary prevention, it's then split out into two main groups. So there's engagement and optimization. So engagement is stuff that a non-clinician could do, like a care coordinator or a social prescribing link worker. And that's stuff like people who are not taking their medicines, people who are not turning up for their checks. So you could set a non-clinician on that work. And then you've got optimization issues. So for this, you've got, who are the people who we should be thinking about starting a statin, and that's split then into the hard to reach groups. You're not allowed to call it hard to reach anymore, but the sort of a measure of looking at our people who are most difficult to engage with. So this looks at all sorts of things like ethnicity, deprivation, drug use, veteran status, all that sort of thing. And then, so that's who should we start lipid lowering on, and then you've got who might benefit from lipid intensification, and trying to break it out into some sort of priority list so that you can, and this is stuff that you could set a pharmacist on. Who are the people who are on just really rubbish statins that we could increase, and so on. And then there's sections for all these different things, so secondary prevention, all that inclisiran stuff, which is heavily promoted, but is really not really where it's at. And then the QOF stuff. So how do we deal with the current new QOF indicators? So this tells you how you're doing, and then what you need to do for the different groups of people. So on that QOF cholesterol 1 indicator, the rules are so complicated, and this breaks it down into here. These are the people who aren't taking their statins. So all you need to do is give them a ring. Then you've got the people who are taking taking ezetimibe or something, so you just need to exception code them, and so on. So hopefully that sort of approach will make life a bit easier for all of us.
On your left hand side, on that tree on the left hand side, which bit of system 1 are you in to get to that tree?
So this is the bit you need to get turned on with system 1. I'll send Michael the email address. It's just their setup email address, and you literally just send them a message saying, for unit number A83636, please turn on visualizations. And then, oops, I pressed the wrong button. Then all you need to do is to put there's an action button that you need to put in your clinical, not on your clinical tree, on your toolbar, which is, go to the visualizations menu.
Okay. Perfect. I'm going to have to excuse myself now. That's really interesting. Gareth, I think that there's a strong reason for us to push this down our meds optimization team. I'm assuming that you've worked through. Does Kate Huddart in Durham know all about this?
Yeah, so I work really closely with Kate.
Perfect. Right. Okay. So Michael, we'll pick up on this and move it through Susan, and we'll take it to the PMMs, I think, and try and get them. Unfortunately, we've got 4 or 5 EMIS practices, so we won't be able to do it wholesale everywhere. But
so what we try,
Jonathan?
What we try and do for EMIS is recreate the searches. But the problem with the searches is that they are not very user friendly, because it's just a list of searches, which are then quite difficult to navigate and work out what you're supposed to do with them. And we're trying to make thinking templates for EMIS, but it is very difficult because the function is limited. We think EMIS X might get round some of that, but we just don't know when that's coming.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks so much for your time, Gareth. We're going to get that shared. Michael's got it recorded, so I think that's going to be a really useful piece of information that we can use to move around everybody and just get people up to speed. So thanks so much for that.
No problem. Any other